Mark chapter 5, verses 25 to 34. A woman was there who had been bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a lot under the care of many doctors and had spent everything she had without getting any better. In fact, she had gotten worse. Because she had heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in a crowd and touched his clothes. She was thinking, if I can just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. Her bleeding stopped immediately, and she sensed in her body that her illness had been healed. At that very moment, Jesus recognized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples said to him, "Don't you see the crowd pressing against you, yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus looked around carefully to see who had done it. The woman, full of fear and trembling, came forward, knowing what had happened to her. She fell down in front of Jesus and told him the whole truth. He responded, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace, healed from your disease."
So last week we were looking at the story that came before this. And just to recap, if you weren't here, Jesus, he's on the boat. He's escaped the busier, crowded places that he was before. And he arrives in what we loosely call the Decapolis, the region of the 10 cities. This is a Gentile area. This isn't a Jewish territory. And Jesus gets off the boat. He's confronted by a man with an evil spirit in him. Jesus casts the spirit out. The spirits go into the pigs. The pigs all die. People come out to see it. And they're afraid of Jesus' power, so they kick him out. That's a nutshell version of that story. But we see in that story there's some differences. Presumably, it seems as though the first audience of Mark's Gospel, the people who would have read it, who would have heard it being read, were probably Jewish. So to their ears, they would have seen Jesus landing there. Oh, well, these are strange people. They eat pigs. We as Jews don't eat pigs. And these are also culturally very different people. So the Decapolis is an area of Greek culture. Now, why is there a pocket of Greek culture so far away from Greece? Well, when the Greek soldiers were following Alexander the Great out towards India, towards Mongolia, just to expand this Greek empire, well, every now and then they would stop. Every now and then some of the soldiers would get older, and those in charge would say, "Okay, you guys have done well. You've helped us conquer new territory, so as a prize, we're going to give you a whole bunch of this land that we've just discovered." Well, they didn't discover it. They took it away from the people they defeated. But now all of a sudden there's Greek pockets. And there's this demon that's overcome. The demon says the demon's name is Legion because there are many. But the Jewish audience would say, well, yeah, there were Roman legions. There were Greek legions who took over this area. And that area is populated by the descendants of those legions. All of that is tied up. The Jewish audience would have heard all of that in that story. So then in this story it says that they arrived on the other side of the lake. The other side. Which presumably means the Jewish side. It seems like this should be a safer place for Jesus. It shouldn't have the same problems as the Gentile side. I miss the lakes. I grew up in Ontario, as some of you know, and when we had nothing to do for an afternoon in the summer, we drove to the lake. And you could go to the beach, you could go camping, there were lots of things you could do at the lake. But the lake sort of comes with it, especially that particular lake, comes with some boundaries that we understand pretty well. Of course, as kids, your parents will say, okay, don't go any farther than this. Don't go in water deeper than your stomach. Don't go beyond sometimes we would go to a beach that had buoys or plastic floaters at a distance. Don't go past there. Well, this was Lake Erie, which stands at the border between Canada and the United States. There's a boundary there. Now, something that we've forgotten almost about the Great Lakes, or maybe out here, we never knew it. Lake Erie shares a shore with Cleveland, Buffalo, neither of them famous for being clean, pristine cities of majestic beauty. No offense. And also, Detroit was just kind of upstream. And this lake was, of the 5 lakes, was by far the most polluted lake. So when we would go swimming in the 80s, there was concerns with the level of contamination, all the chemicals from all the factories in all of these steel belt cities that were polluting our lake. And was it clean enough? Was it safe enough to swim in? And on top of that, there were sports rivalries. All these cities all had teams, and there was kind of a boundary. If you went a certain distance down the lake, then everybody cheered for the Red Wings. If you went a different distance, everybody cheered for the Buffalo Sabres. There were just boundaries all around us. There were boundaries. And when we watched TV, when I was young, we had 2 channels, one from London, just up the road, and one came across the lake from Erie, Pennsylvania. And we watched, the American shows were better, but when we listened to their news, they thought they were better than us. At least it felt that way. These barriers, these boundaries that just kind of came across when all these memories came back as I was thinking about lakes and the cultural divides here. So the audience would have heard Jesus crossing to the other side of the lake, and all of this cultural stuff, all of this competitive stuff is built in there. So the audience is thinking, okay, well now he's safe again. He's among God's people. He's among the people who have it kind of figured out. This will work well. This will be a safer place than where he was before. And we see at first there's a sign of that there's a huge crowd. They're excited to see Jesus. Somehow word has got out. They recognize his boat or something. And the boat arrives and there's immediately a huge crowd. So it must be Jews. They've heard about Jesus. And then immediately they're greeted by a man named Jairus, who works for a synagogue. So right away now we know for sure this is a Jewish community. And this man Jairus approaches Jesus and he asks for help. And we've been seeing Jesus' interactions with the religious community, they've changed. Initially he was in the synagogues. Initially he was interacting with the priests. Initially he was trying to build up his status among the religious system, but now he's moved away. He's preaching in the wilderness. He's away from the towns. He's away from the systems and the authorities. But now Jairus has sought Jesus out. Now it doesn't say that Jairus is a priest or that he's a Pharisee. It doesn't call him a scribe. It just says that he worked for the synagogue. So he seems to be connected enough. He knows who Jesus is, but he isn't connected enough to be afraid of Jesus. Now, why would this be? Well, the synagogue leaders where Jesus is coming from didn't like him. But we see that this man has a request. He's not asking Jesus questions about the Bible, about God. He's asking questions about his daughter. So my translation says it's his little daughter. And you're wondering, how does this connect to the story in the song? Well, that's the middle story. This is the outside story. Jesus is there, and Jairus says, this guy can help me. He can help my daughter. So Jairus goes to him and he pleads, Jesus, my daughter is sick, and I want you to lay your hands on her to heal her. But, so my Common English Bible, which I usually like better, it says, my daughter, but most of our translations will say, my little daughter. In the Greek, there's it's sort of a diminutive, that's a fancy word. It's a way of saying that the man is speaking affectionately about his daughter. His baby daughter, his beloved daughter is sick. So now we understand. Why is the synagogue worker going past the boundaries and talking to somebody outside of the authorized religious stuff? Because he is desperate. He wants his daughter to be healed. So you can imagine where this guy's coming from. Yeah, the synagogue is where I work, and the synagogue doesn't love Jesus, but I love my daughter, and we've done what we can, and nothing's working. Maybe Jesus can do it. So then it doesn't take us too long to put ourselves in Jairus' shoes. Are we going to hold on to orthodoxy, credibility? Are we going to hold on to tradition and just let go of an opportunity to maybe heal the daughter? No. We're going to throw all of that away. Are you going to fire me because I love my daughter too much? Go ahead. Are you going to take away my leadership within the community because of my kids? Then I'm gone. Right? Jairus doesn't care about any of that. And I've talked to you. You love your kids. You love the young people in your community. You're not going to hold on to traditionalism, orthodoxy, to protect a child? No. We love our kids. We're going to make sacrifices. Jairus is doing that. So Jairus tells Jesus the situation. Jesus says, yeah, we'll go. And now this whole crowd that's gathered around Jesus, all of them are on their way to Jairus' house. Now, in this crowd, some of them are spectators. They want to see what's going on. It's kind of a circus is coming through town. They want to see Jesus do something interesting. But some of them are like Jairus. They want to be healed. They want to be cured. They have questions. There are things they want to learn. And within that huge crowd, some of them are hoping, okay, once this daughter's been healed, then maybe it's my turn. But it's sort of like a church potluck, right? You kind of are doing the math. You look around, okay, the guy with the crutches, he's going to ask Jesus to be healed. That guy seems to be blind. He probably is going to talk to Jesus. And you just kind of look at the math. I'm not going to get in front of all of those people. Right? When we have a potluck here, and somebody brings a bucket of chicken, then you're kind of counting the people in front of you and behind you to determine how much chicken you can take. So there's among this crowd, there's a woman who's doing that math. And she's counting, and this is kind of speculation, but I don't think it's too big of a stretch. And she's looking to see where she fits. Where is she on the ladder of people who are going to get help? And she's doing the math. And she thinks about her age. There's a boundary. Right? When you're in the waiting room at the hospital or the walk-in clinic, if you don't have an appointment, there is math involved. Who's the sickest? Who's the weakest? Who needs the help the most? And so she's doing the math. Okay, well, based on my age, there's a boundary. Based on my gender, there's a boundary. I'm weak and sickly. I can't push my way to the front. There's a boundary. And then on top of that, there are religious restrictions in the way. Because this woman, depending on the translation, they describe it differently because it's delicate. It says she's hemorrhaging. And she has a bleeding issue that's been going on for 12 years. She's spent her money. She's gone to the doctors. They can't do anything. In fact, it's getting worse. She's tried everything. just like Jairus. She's tried everything. She needs something. She's done the math. She figures she's not going to get to the front. And even if she does, she will have to say, Jesus, I need help. I'm bleeding. My bleeding won't stop. It's been going on for 12 years. Then everyone in the crowd with a hint of biblical knowledge will say, well then, woman, you shouldn't be with us. If you are bleeding, you are unclean. Right? And all of them are thinking, yeah, but these are the rules. This is written into Scripture. This is clearly written in God's commands to us. If you're bleeding, you are unclean. There is a boundary. Stay on your side of the boundary. So that's part of this woman's mental math. If I have to explain to Jesus what I need help from, even if he wants to help me, everyone else will be angry at me for just being in the crowd. She's bleeding. She's unclean. She shouldn't be touching anyone. And she's among a crowd where everybody's pushing up against everybody. So she's keeping all of this to herself. But then she has an idea. She's thinking, okay, but like Jesus has miraculous power. We all know that. And if I just touch him, that'll be enough. Because I can't ask him, I can't explain in this crowd what's wrong with me. If I just touch him, that'll be enough. I'll keep my pain, my sickness secret. I'll keep my problems secret. But if I just touch him, that'll be enough. Now, the Bible doesn't sit down and explain to us the science behind or the mechanics behind how the healing happens, how any of them happen. So if it's a miraculous healing, it already doesn't fit our explanation. But this doesn't seem to fit with what works in other stories, but she does this. She kind of fights her way through the crowd and just reaches out and touches his clothes. Not his body, not anything, not his hair, just his clothes, just the outside part of his clothes. And in that moment, Jesus feels power leaving him. It's a strange explanation. But Jesus can feel that something has happened, that he's helped somebody unknowingly. So he stops. It's kind of one of these moments of almost comedic confusion. Jesus is standing in a huge crowd. When you're walking in a crowd, you're almost not using your own energy anymore. The crowd is carrying you. But Jesus stops and he says, "Who touched me?" And everybody yeah, Jesus, we're all touching you. We're in a huge crowd. Sorry, what do you want, a boundary? You want us to have space around you? We're all touching you. And Jesus says, no, somebody's touched me. And the woman, she's terrified. Because she just wanted to touch him and be healed. And she touched him, and as soon as she did, not only did Jesus feel that power had gone out, she felt immediate. She didn't check. She wasn't poking around. She knew it was done. Her body felt different. But then Jesus stops, and she realizes she's been discovered. So she falls on her knees, just like Jairus fell on his knees in front of Jesus. She fell on her knees and explained to Jesus what had happened. And Jesus said two things that I think are important and powerful here. One, he says, "Your faith has made you well." So Jesus isn't taking credit for this, which is consistent. We've seen this all throughout the book of Mark. Jesus is really hesitant to take credit for healings. And when we look at this woman, she's done a number of things that are inconsistent. If her faith was proper, scriptural, all the things that the Jews around her understood, she would not have been in that crowd. If she understood Jesus the way that we, now 2,000 years later, getting to read the stories, if she understood Jesus like we do, she wouldn't have had to guess and imagine all these things. She would have just known it. She had an imperfect faith. She got a lot of things wrong. But still, Jesus could help her and give her credit for her faith. It's a lot of comfort to those of us who feel like we don't have enough faith. We sometimes think we don't even have enough faith for God to heal us, let alone for our own faith to heal us. But Jesus says, your faith has made you well. But he doesn't call her by name. He says, daughter. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Daughter. They're on their way to heal Jairus' daughter. They're on their way to heal Jairus' daughter, who we read later on is 12 years old. This woman has been bleeding for 12 years. Now, maybe those are accurate numbers in the story, but it's also a Jewish writer telling the story of a Jewish Messiah traveling in a Jewish community, differentiating this community from the Gentile community as a Jewish one. He says the number 12 twice. There are 12 tribes of Israel. Jesus is walking with 12 disciples. 12 is an important number, signifying God's power and control. So maybe Mark is hinting at some of this already. But Jesus calls her his daughter. I think everybody in the crowd heard Jairus' explanation, or at least it was kind of relayed back. Where are we going? Well, this guy up here, he wants Jesus to heal his daughter. Okay, we're all going to help the daughter. And Jesus says to this woman, daughter, your faith has made you well. We don't approach Jesus as strangers. We don't approach Jesus from a distance as somebody who he doesn't know or care about. We don't have to elevate ourselves for Jesus to elevate us. Jesus knows us already. So, you've got issues, you've got things you need Jesus to help you with. You are in the same family. Jesus cares about you automatically the same way. So, Jesus would have understood those boundaries, and by calling her his daughter, he's saying there are no boundaries between us. Your age, your gender, your health, your status as being clean or unclean, none of that matters. There is no boundary between Jesus and the people that Jesus wants to heal and help. That's all of us. That's all the people around us. So the crowd moves on. This woman's life is changed. Her faith is encouraged and rewarded. And then the crowd is about to continue to Jairus' house when one of the servants comes the other way and says, hey, Jairus, don't bother the teacher anymore. Your daughter's died. Daughter. Now also we see another layer of cleanliness, because Jairus asked Jesus, will you come and lay your hand on my daughter? Just touch her. If you touch my daughter, she will be healed. It's the same thing that the woman thought. If I just touch Jesus, not his skin, because that would make him unclean, but I'll touch his clothes. But now this girl, if she's dead now, then for Jesus to touch the daughter would make Jesus unclean by the same religious systems. And so the servants have come out and said, Jairus, your daughter is dead. And we all know that if this teacher, the servants call Jesus a teacher, if the teacher comes to us and lays his hands on your daughter like you've asked, he will be ceremonially unclean and will have to retreat from society until the appropriate amount of time has passed. So don't bother Jesus. And that may be the biggest boundary that we know. Convenience. We let convenience stop us from doing a lot of things. Or we allow convenience to be the excuse to give us permission to do a lot of things that aren't healthy for us. Fast food is a whole lot more convenient than healthy food. Right? Convenience is a justification for a lot of things. And so here the servant says, don't inconvenience the teacher anymore. There's another boundary. And some of us are happy to inconvenience other people. Some of us hold on to some anxiety about that. The thing that I said before about the potluck lineup, some of you never thought twice about how much chicken you took because it's a potluck. Some of you are doing that math very carefully. I think the people that are doing the math that I was talking about came from big families, right? Mom brought the soup to the table. You were kind of doing, okay, one ladle for everybody, then there should be a little bit extra for me. That's why I eat quickly, because if you didn't eat quickly, you didn't get a second bowl. That's the way it worked. So here, Jesus is still walking, and the servant comes and says, don't inconvenience Jesus. And Jesus says, yeah, we're going. We're still going. What are you talking about? They get there, and there's a crowd of mourners. They're grieving with Jairus' family. And Jesus says, you guys need to leave. She's not dead. She's sleeping. Jesus has healed the hemorrhaging woman, and now he's entered here, and he's going to wake this daughter up. And the crowd, the mourners who have gathered, they could have been like, buddy, we've been here for a while. Her heart has stopped. She's dead. And this talk of her just sleeping is really just giving false hope. They could have done that. That might have been sympathetic, but they didn't do that. They laughed. They said, buddy, if you think you're going to step in here and change anything, you're crazy. This story is over. They laughed. They were supposed to be there to cry with the family, and this is how artificial their sympathy was. They laughed at Jesus. One more boundary. To hold on to hope sometimes is to invite the ridicule of the cynics and skeptics around us. So, do you want to be a hopeful person, or do you want to be proper or in the eyes of the community around you? I know some of our stories, we hold on to that belief of good things. We hold on to that faith. We hold on to that hope in ways that make us look silly, and it doesn't matter. So Jesus sends everybody out. Their behavior is inappropriate. Their laughing is inappropriate. Their skepticism is inappropriate. But also what they're watching for is inappropriate. Because these mourners are professionals. That's what they do. When somebody dies, the mourners show up and cry with you. And believe me, that's an important thing. If you've had people cry with you before at the right time, you know how important and cathartic that is. But Jesus sends them out, and he puts his hand on her, and he says, Talitha cum. It's written into the stories in the Aramaic. There's a call there. Jesus is saying, little girl, wake up. And she does. The mourners aren't watching anymore. They're not there. They don't get to see the beauty of the power of this moment. Only the family. And then Jesus tells them to, don't tell anyone. The beauty and the power of this, don't spread it around. Just live it out. One of the other implications of her being 12, as strange as this sounds to us, that was the time when she would have been preparing for marriage. That's when the family would have started making those negotiations, and they would have been negotiating with potential suitors for the bridal price. Also a weird thing in our society. So this man obviously has a profound compassion for his daughter. But if she dies, then in many ways they could be impoverished from all of the expenses around that, but also the bride price that they don't get. There are so many layers to this. It's not just emotion, it's also shame, it's also poverty. Jesus rescued them from all of that. And all of those things would have put barriers between them and the society around them. So we don't understand that culture, those religious barriers, cultural barriers, economic barriers. Our society functions differently, but we understand barriers in our day. We don't want to inconvenience other people. We give preference for some people over others, and without thinking about it, we put up boundaries between us and the people who need us. We put up boundaries between the people who have the capacity to give help and love and the people who need it. We put up boundaries between God and the people who need God. But God is no respecter of the boundaries we put up. So, let this story this morning be a challenge. If you are feeling boundaries that are put up by your family, by your community, by your economic situation, I want you to take comfort. God does not see those boundaries. And if you are working hard to install boundaries, reinforce boundaries that'll keep God out of certain places, I want you to know that your efforts are futile. God doesn't respect the boundaries that we put up. Nor should we respect the boundaries that other people want us to stay behind. God's love knows no boundaries, and neither should ours. Amen.